Before wheat, before rice, before corn became king, there was a grain so nutritious, so resilient, and so productive that it single-handedly sustained some of the largest civilizations the world has ever seen. The Aztecs built an empire on it. The Incas worshipped it. Entire cities, hundreds of thousands of people, were fed almost exclusively by this one crop. It grows in drought. It grows in flood. It grows in soil so poor that nothing else survives. It produces seed in as little as 45 days. A single plant can yield over 500,000 seeds, and pound for pound, it contains more protein, more iron, more calcium, and more essential amino acids than any grain you've ever been told to eat. So where is it? Why isn't it in every grocery store? Why isn't it in every farm field? Why isn't it taught in every agriculture class on Earth? Because in 1519, a man named Hernan Cortez stepped off a boat in Mexico and decided this grain had to be destroyed. Not because it was dangerous, because it made people free. And what happened next is one of the greatest agricultural crimes in human history. The grain is called amaranth. And to understand why it was erased, you first have to understand just how extraordinary it is. Amaranth isn't technically a grain, it's a pseudocereal, meaning it's not a grass like wheat or rice, but it's used the same way. You harvest the seeds, you grind them into flour, you cook them like porridge, you pop them like popcorn. But nutritionally, amaranth doesn't just compete with conventional grains, it embarrasses them. Here are the numbers. 1 cup of cooked amaranth contains 9.3 grams of protein, the same amount of brown rice, 5.5 grams, wheat, 5.3 grams. But it's not just the quantity of protein that matters, it's the quality. Amaranth contains lysine. That's the amino acid that's missing from almost every other grain on the planet. Wheat doesn't have enough of it, rice doesn't have enough of it, corn doesn't have enough of it. Amaranth does. That single fact makes amaranth a complete protein source, something almost unheard of in the plant kingdom. It has 3 times the calcium of wheat, 5 times the iron of rice, twice the magnesium of most grains. It's loaded with phosphorus, potassium, zinc, vitamin B6, and folate. And the leaves? Most people don't even know this, but amaranth leaves are edible too. They contain more vitamin A than kale, more vitamin C than oranges, more iron than spinach. In many parts of Asia and Africa, the leaves are actually more popular than the grain itself. But the nutrition is only half the story. What really made amaranth dangerous to power structures, was how it grows. Amaranth thrives in heat. It thrives in drought. It grows in sand, clay, rocky slopes, and depleted farmland. It laughs at the conditions that kill wheat and corn. Some varieties mature in as little as 45 days, half the time of most staple crops. And a single amaranth plant can produce between 100,000 and 500,000 seeds. One plant, 500,000 seeds. You cannot create dependency in a population that grows amaranth. You can't starve them into submission. You can't control their food supply. They'll just grow more, everywhere, in any conditions, forever. And that is exactly why it had to go. To understand what was taken from us, you need to see what amaranth made possible. By the early 1500s, the Aztec Empire was one of the most sophisticated civilizations on Earth. Their capital, Tenochtitlan, was a city of over 200,000 people, larger than any city in Europe at the time, larger than London, larger than Paris. It was built on a lake, connected by massive causeways, organized into districts, and supplied by an agricultural system so advanced that Spanish soldiers who saw it wept at its beauty. At the center of that system was amaranth. The Aztecs called it huauhtli. It wasn't just food, it was currency, it was medicine, it was religion. Every year, an estimated 20,000 tons of amaranth grain was delivered to Tenochtitlan as tribute from conquered provinces. 20,000 tons. That's roughly the same weight of 150 blue whales, every single year. Amaranth was so central to Aztec life that it was used in their most sacred religious ceremonies. They would mix the grain with honey and sometimes sacrificial blood to form a dough called huauhtli. This dough was shaped into figures of their gods, particularly Huitzilopochtli, the god of war and the sun. The figures were paraded through the streets, worshipped, and then broken apart and eaten by the people. Every citizen consumed the flesh of their god. Through amaranths, they believed they were taking divine power into their own bodies. Remember that detail, it becomes very important in a moment. The Incas had their own relationship with amaranth. They called it kiwicha, and it occupied a similar role, a sacred grain, a survival food, a crop that could grow at altitudes where nothing else would. At 11,000 feet above sea level, in the thin air of the Andes, kiwicha thrived. These weren't primitive civilizations stumbling onto a lucky plant. These were sophisticated agricultural civilizations that specifically chose amaranth out of every option available to them as their primary crop. They chose it because it was the best, the most nutritious, the most resilient, the most productive. After thousands of years of farming, amaranth was their answer. And then the Spanish arrived. Hernán Cortés arrived in Mexico in 1519 with roughly 500 soldiers. Within 2 years, the Aztec Empire, a civilization of millions, had fallen. The reasons are complex. Disease played the largest role. Smallpox killed millions before the Spanish ever reached them. Political alliances with rival indigenous groups gave Cortés the manpower he needed. But the military conquest was only the beginning. What followed was a systematic campaign to destroy Aztec culture, religion, and critically, their food system, and amaranth was number one. The Spanish missionaries who accompanied Cortés were horrified by the huauhtli ceremony. They saw the Aztec people shaping dough into the forms of gods and eating them. To Catholic missionaries in the 16th century, this looked like a demonic mockery of the Eucharist, the Christian ritual of consuming the body and blood of Christ through bread and wine. They didn't see a legitimate religious practice. They saw heresy, satanic imitation, a direct challenge to the Catholic faith. And so they decided that the grain that made the ceremony possible had to be eliminated. What happened next was not subtle. Cortés issued a decree banning the cultivation of amaranth throughout the conquered territories. Anyone caught growing amaranth could have their hands cut off. Let me say that again. If you were an indigenous farmer and you planted amaranth, the crop your family had grown for generations, the crop that fed your children, you could lose your hands. Entire amaranth fields were burned. Stored grain was confiscated and destroyed. The Spanish didn't just ban amaranth, they replaced it. They forced indigenous farmers to grow European crops instead. Wheat, barley, crops that required more water, more care, more specific conditions, crops that would fail in the same environments where amaranth thrived effortlessly. This wasn't a side effect of colonization, this was a deliberate strategy. By destroying amaranth, the Spanish accomplished 3 things simultaneously. 1, they destroyed the religious practices they found threatening. 2, they destroyed food sovereignty. A population that can feed itself is a population that can resist. Remove their food source and you remove their independence. 3, they created dependency. When your traditional crop is illegal and the replacement crops require European tools, European seeds, and European knowledge, you need the colonizers to survive. You become dependent on the very people who conquered you. The burning of amaranth wasn't agriculture, it was warfare. The Spanish ban on amaranth was devastatingly effective. Within a generation, the crop that had fed millions was nearly extinct in the Americas. Growing amaranth became an act of resistance. Small, hidden plots in remote mountain villages, seeds passed secretly between families, a whispered rebellion that kept the grain alive by the thinnest of threads. But outside of those hidden gardens, amaranth vanished from the Western world. And here's what's remarkable. It stayed vanished for 500 years. While wheat became the foundation of European and American agriculture, while corn was adopted and industrialized, while rice spread across Asia, amaranth sat in the shadows, unresearched, unfunded, unmentioned in agriculture textbooks, absent from seed catalogs, missing from dietary guidelines. 5 centuries of silence. It wasn't until 1975 that a botanist named John Robson published a paper that brought amaranth back into scientific conversation. He called it the crop of the future. The National Academy of Sciences followed up with a report in 1984 that confirmed what the Aztecs had known for 3,000 years. Amaranth was one of the most nutritious and resilient food crops on the planet. But even then, even after modern science validated everything, amaranth didn't enter the mainstream. It didn't get subsidized by governments, it didn't get researched on industrial farms, it didn't get featured in dietary guidelines. Wheat did, corn did, rice did, soy did. The crops that require the most fertilizer, the most pesticides, the most irrigation, and the most corporate infrastructure, those are the crops that received billions of dollars in government subsidies. The crop that needs nothing, that grows anywhere, that feeds people for almost free? That crop still isn't on the list. And now we arrived at the question that ties everything together. Why, after the science confirmed it, after the nutritional data proved it, after 3,000 years of civilizational evidence demonstrated it, why is amaranth still not a mainstream crop? And the answer is the same answer it always is. The same answer it was in the last video. The same answer it will be in the next one. There is no money in a crop that anyone can grow anywhere with no inputs. Let me make this concrete. The global wheat market is worth approximately $150 billion per year. That number doesn't just represent wheat. It represents the fertilizers needed to grow wheat, the pesticides needed to protect wheat, the irrigation systems needed to water wheat, the specialized machinery needed to harvest wheat, the supply chains, the storage facilities, the processing plants, the distribution networks. Wheat isn't just a crop, it's an industry, and every link in that chain is a company making money. Amaranth breaks that chain. Amaranth needs no fertilizer. It fixes its own nitrogen. Amaranth needs no pesticide. Almost nothing attacks it. Amaranth needs no irrigation. It's drought-resistant at a genetic level. Amaranth needs no specialized equipment. You can harvest it by hand, thresh it by hand, and process it with tools that cost nothing. If amaranth replaced even 10% of global wheat production, hundreds of billions of dollars in adjacent industries would collapse. Fertilizer sales, pesticide sales, irrigation equipment, genetically modified seed patents. Nobody has to conspire. Nobody has to meet in secret. The economic system simply selects for crops that generate economic activity and ignores crops that don't. Amaranth doesn't generate economic activity, it generates food. And in our system, those are two very different things. So the subsidies go to wheat, the research funding goes to corn, the dietary guidelines promote rice, and amaranth, the single most nutritious grain ever cultivated by human hands, sits on a dusty shelf in the health food aisle, if it's there at all. Here's the part they don't want you to hear. You can grow amaranth right now, today, in your backyard, in a container on your porch, in a community garden, in a vacant lot. In most places, it's perfectly legal. It's one of the easiest crops on earth to grow, and I'm going to show you exactly how. Step 1. Get seeds. Amaranth seeds are available from almost any seed company. Look for grain varieties. Amaranthus cruentus and Amaranthus hypochondriacus are the two most common grain types. A single packet costs $2 to $3 and contains enough seeds to plant a 200 square foot plot. That plot will produce roughly 10 to 15 pounds of grain. Step 2. Plant them. Amaranth seeds are tiny, almost like dust. Scatter them on the surface of your soil after the last frost. Don't bury them. They need light to germinate. Just press them gently into the surface with your hand. Water once, then step back. Step 3. Wait. That's it. Seriously. Amaranth germinates in 7 to 14 days.
Once established, it needs almost no water. It actually performs better in dry conditions. Overwatering is the most common mistake. It needs no fertilizer. It attracts no significant pests. It grows 4 to 8 feet tall and produces enormous seed heads, deep red, bright gold, or vivid purple, depending on the variety. Step 4. Harvest. When the seed heads begin to dry on the plant, usually 90 to 120 days after planting, bend them over a bucket and rub them between your hands. The seeds fall out easily. Winnow them by pouring them between 2 containers in a light breeze. The chaff blows away. The seeds fall straight. That's it. That's your harvest. Step 5. Use it. Pop the seeds in a dry skillet like popcorn. They puff up into tiny, crunchy, nutty morsels. Grind them into flour for bread, tortillas, or pancakes. Cook them like porridge, 1 part amaranth to 3 parts water. Simmer for 20 minutes. Toss the leaves into salads, soups, or stir-fries throughout the entire growing season. 1 $2 packet of seeds, 1 season, 10 to 15 pounds of the most nutritious grain on the planet. No fertilizer, no pesticide, no irrigation, no tractor, no corporation. And next year, save a handful of seeds from your harvest. Plant them again. You never buy seeds again, ever. You have become a self-sustaining source of one of the most complete foods in human history. The Aztecs knew this, the Incas knew this, and now you know it. 500 years ago, a civilization was dismantled. Their temples were torn down, their books were burned, their language was suppressed, their religion was outlawed, and their most important crop, the grain that made all of it possible, was ripped from the earth and replaced with something weaker, something dependent, something controllable. But they couldn't kill it, not completely. In the mountains of Oaxaca, indigenous farmers kept amaranth in secret. In the Andes, Quichua families hid kiwicha seeds and passed them down through generations. In India and Nepal, varieties of amaranth continued to flourish as a staple crop, untouched by European colonization. The grain survived because people risked everything to keep it alive. And now, for the first time in 500 years, amaranth is spreading again. Small farms in Mexico are reclaiming it. Researchers in Africa are testing it as a solution to food insecurity. Backyard gardeners in America and Europe are planting it, often without knowing the history of what they're growing. Every amaranth seed you plant is an act of remembering. Every harvest is a small rebellion against 5 centuries of erasure. You're not just growing a crop, you're restoring something that was stolen. And the next time someone asks you why you've never heard of amaranth, the single most nutritious grain ever cultivated by human hands, the crop that fed empires, the seed that survives anything, now you know the answer. You weren't supposed to hear about it. If this video changed what you thought you knew about history, send it to someone who needs to see it. Every share pushes this back into the conversation where it belongs. And if you want to know about the ancient irrigation system that waters your entire garden for 6 months with 1 buried clay pot, a technique NASA studied and the modern world forgot, that video is right here. I'll see you there.